It's quite difficult to come up with something new to say about Tiananmen Square in Beijing and the Forbidden City which is adjacent to it. Tiananmen Square particularly has a reputation in recent years, but it's actually quite a wonderful open space, always filled with people, local and tourists. And there's the Forbidden City in the distance, behind the pink building with the picture of Mao Zedong on the front. But in the square itself there are a number of grand buildings. That's Mao's mausoleum, and that is somebody selling kites. They're famous for kites, and they're flown in the square, and these rather grand statues are of Mao's Great March. The Forbidden City itself is like an onion, with layers of an onion, and there's one of the entrance gates, and you can see on this graphic the various gates through which one passes as one walks from north to south. And we're now inside the first gate and walking through that to the second one and the first courtyard, and we just carry on through. The Forbidden City itself has 999 rooms, I think. VIPs such as this group are normally fast-tracked. It really is a wonderful place. It's obviously receiving quite a substantial facelift in the upcoming Olympic Games in 2008, and one wonders about the hammer with 2 new heads and 3 new handles. But I guess the spectre is the same. I didn't fancy this chap. Some kind of hippopotamus turned elephant, I think. These buildings had received a wonderful restoration, but as I said, one wonders what one is looking at, old or new. Of course, the city has suffered attacks, military attacks from the British, from the French, so there's obviously been repair work over the centuries, and here it is ongoing now on the pavements and the entrances. But the work itself is in keeping with the work of those who built it 1,000 years or more ago. Glorious tiled walls, studded doors, another gloriously tiled wall, decorated roofs both under the eaves and on the ridges. And this is a little square given over to one of the emperor's past activities. Wonderful bronzes in typical Chinese form. Dragons and grand creatures. Everything hugely decorated. The Empress apparently had a garden, and this is the edge of the garden. Oh, these are the tired travellers from our little group, and here's the garden itself, with imported rocks from all over China, very old trees, and finally the far end one walks out and there's this huge moat, and we're back out in 21st century Beijing, and that's the little group that stayed the course. The Chinese guides are very good at escorting visitors to places where they're encouraged to part with their money. This was a so-called silk factory. There was obviously some silk spinning and weaving taking place, but it was primarily a retail outlet. And as you can see, some of the products were suitably hung on splendid Chinese ladies who did their best to encourage people to buy the products. A complete change of scene now as we visit the Great Wall at one of the locations outside Beijing, one of the less populated locations where one gets a rather more uninterrupted view of the wall. The wall again is a little bit like the Forbidden City. It has received restoration, and the plaque that was on the screen a moment ago pays tribute to a German restoration of this section of the wall. The wall was purely defensive, stopping people coming from Mongolia into this sector of China. So the walkway presumably was for patrolling, and these intermediate forts were for some kind of residential arrangement for those who did the patrolling. It's in a state of disrepair in places, but it has been restored to a greater extent in the area that we're standing in. The impressive thing is the way that the wall just snakes off into the distance. It's not just one wall, it tends to separate and cover the ground on the various ridges and then come back together again. The fact that this has been built over the last 2,000 years is absolutely amazing over such terrain and in such hostile conditions. Here you can see one of the forts in the intermediate distance, and then the wall rises behind it, so the walking is very difficult. Even though the walking area is stepped, it's very difficult. And there you see the terrain to which the wall clings in the distance. The light was fading when we were there, and so the photography has a greater significance and impact in the gloom. The autumn colours added nature's contribution to the spectacle. Very English in the colouring, the beech trees, I guess. There's a point where the wall separates. One of the towers and another one, and more into the distance. The autumn colours again. Walking up to the wall would have been virtually impossible. There's a cable car system. And here are one or two of our friends, Chris Malking, Alex Block from Australia, and dear Sandra. The big problem at places such as this is the constant pressure from traders, and here are the various traders, and you have to run the gauntlet of these people, some hostile, some less so, as one makes one's way up and down to and from the wall. And there's our final view in the evening light. The Railway Museum in Beijing is a relatively new enterprise, opened in 2002. As with all museums, it of course displays static exhibits, and these huge steam beasts from the past look rather odd, standing completely immobilized in a polished museum. Nevertheless, at least they haven't suffered the fate of some of the more recent locomotives and ended up as smelted iron for motor cars, washing machines and whatever products of modern China. So we were at least given the opportunity to look at a representative range of Chinese steam engines from the past, some of which owe their parentage to Britain and some of which owe their parentage to the USA. And one coming up now is actually a Baldwin locomotive, which is USA manufactured in Philadelphia, USA. They say that all men are equal, but some are more equal than others, and this is the steam heating system, and here are the apartments in a coach reserved for senior Chinese Communist Party officials in time past. That's a sleeping compartment. So there we have it. A wonderful trip concluded by our visit to the square and to the museum, to the silk factory, and maybe it's au revoir, not goodbye.